Section 44 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771, by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 44. Some account of that part of New Holland called New South Wales, Part 2. The sea, however, made some amends for the bareness of the land. Fish, though not so plentiful as they generally are in higher latitudes, were far from scarce. Where we had an opportunity of hauling the seine, we generally caught from 50 to 200 pound of fish in a tide. Their sorts were various, none I think but mullets known in Europe. In general, however, they were sufficiently palatable, and some very delicate food. The stingrays, indeed, which were caught on the southern part of the coast, were very coarse, but little else was caught, so we were obliged to comfort ourselves with the comforts of plenty, and enjoy more pleasure in satiety than in eating. To the northward again, when we came to be entangled within the great reef, within which we sailed to our knowledge many leagues, and we knew not how many more, perplexed every moment with shoals, was a plenty of turtle hardly to be credited. Every shoal swarmed with them. The weather, indeed, was generally so boisterous that our boats could not row after them so fast as they could swim, so that we got but few, but they were excellent, and so large that a single turtle always served the ship. Had we been there either at the time of laying or the more moderate season, we doubtless might have taken any quantity. Besides this, all the shoals that were dry at half ebb afforded plenty of fish that were left dry in small hollows of the rocks, and a profusion of large shellfish, chamagigas, such as Dampier describes Volume 3, page 191. The large ones of this kind had 10 or 15 pound of meat in them. It was indeed rather strong, but I believe a very wholesome food, and well relished by the people in general. On different parts of the coast were also found oysters, which were said to be very well tasted. The shells also of well-sized lobsters and crabs were seen, but these it was never our fortune to catch. Upon the whole, New Holland, though in every respect the most barren country I have seen, is not so bad but that between the productions of sea and land, a company of people, who should have the misfortune of being shipwrecked upon it, might support themselves, even by the resources that we have seen. Undoubtedly, a longer stay in visiting different parts would discover many more. This immense tract of land, the largest known, which does not bear the name of a continent, as it is considerably larger than all Europe, is thinly inhabited, even to admiration, at least that part of it that we saw. We never but once saw so many as 30 Indians together, and that was a family. Men, women, and children assembled upon a rock to see the ship pass by. At Stingray's Bay, where they evidently came down to fight us several times, they could never muster above 14 or 15 fighting men. Indeed, in other places they generally ran away from us, from whence it might be concluded that there were greater numbers than we saw, but their houses and sheds in the woods, which we never failed to find, convinced us of the smallness of their parties. We saw indeed only the sea-coast. What the immense tract of inland country may produce is to us totally unknown. We may have the liberty to conjecture, however, that they are totally uninhabited. The sea has, I believe, been universally found to be the chief source of supplies to Indians ignorant of the arts of cultivation. The wild produce of the land alone seems scarce able to support them at all seasons. At least, I do not remember to have read of any inland nation who did not cultivate the ground more or less. Even the North Americans, who were so well versed in hunting, sowed their maize. But should a people live inland who supported themselves by cultivation, these inhabitants of the sea-coast must certainly have learnt to imitate them, in some degree at least. Otherwise their reason must be supposed to hold a rank little superior to that of monkeys. Whatever may be the reason of this want of people is difficult to guess, unless perhaps the barrenness of the soil and scarcity of fresh water. But why mankind should not increase here as fast as in other places, unless their small tribes have frequent wars, in which many are destroyed. They were generally furnished with plenty of weapons, whose points of the stings of stingrays seemed intended against nothing but their own species, from whence such an inference might easily be drawn. That their customs were nearly the same throughout the whole length of the coast along which we sailed, I should think very probable. Though we had connections with them only at one place, yet we saw them either with our eyes or glasses many times, and at Stingray's Bay had some experience of their manners. Their colour, arms, method of using them, were the same as we afterwards had a nearer view of. They likewise in the same manner went naked, and painted themselves. Their houses were the same. They notched large trees in the same manner, and even the bags they carried their furniture in were of exactly the same manufacture. Something between netting and knitting, which I have nowhere else seen in the immediate places. Our glasses might deceive us in many things, but their colour and want of clothes we certainly did see, and wherever we came ashore the houses and sheds, places where they had dressed victuals with heated stones, and trees notched for the convenience of climbing them, sufficiently evinced them to be the same people. The tribe with which we had connections consisted of 21 people, 12 men, 7 women, a boy, and a girl. So many at least we saw, and there might be more, especially women, who we did not see. The men were remarkably short and slender built in proportion. The tallest we measured was 5 feet 9, the shortest 5'2". Their medium height seemed to be about 5 feet 6, as the tall man appeared more disproportioned in size from his fellows than the short one. What their absolute colour is difficult to say. They were so completely covered with dirt, which seemed to have stuck to their hides from the day of their birth, without their once having attempted to remove it. I tried indeed by spitting upon my finger and rubbing, but altered the colour very little, which as nearly as might be resembled that of chocolate. The beards of several were bushy and thick. Their hair, which as well as their beards was black, they wore cropped close round their ears. In some it was lank as the Europeans', in others a little crisped, as is common in the South Sea Islands, but in none of them at all resembled the wool of negroes. They had also all their 4 teeth, in which 2 things they differed chiefly from those seen by Dampier, supposing him not to be mistaken. As for colour, they would undoubtedly be called blacks by anyone not used to consider attentively the colours of different nations. Myself should never have thought of such distinctions, had I not seen the effect of sun and wind upon the natives of the South Sea Islands, where many of the better sort of people who keep themselves close at home are nearly as white as Europeans, while the poorer sort, obliged in their business of fishing, etc., to expose their naked bodies to all the inclemencies of the climate, have some among them but little lighter than the New Hollanders. They were all to a man lean and clean-limbed, and seemed to be very light and active. Their countenances were not without some expression, though I cannot charge them with much. Their voices in general shrill and effeminate. Of clothes they had not the least part, but naked as ever our general father was before his fall. They seemed no more conscious of their nakedness than if they had not been the children of parents who eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Whether this want of what most nations look upon as absolutely necessary proceeds from idleness or want of invention is difficult to say. In the article of ornaments, however, useless as they are, neither has the one hindered them from contriving nor the other from making them. Of these, the chief, and that on which they seemed to set the greatest value, is a bone about 5 or 6 inches in length, and thick as a man's finger, which they thrust into a hole bored through that part which divides the nostrils, so that it sticks across their face, making in the eyes of Europeans a most ludicrous appearance, though no doubt they esteemed this as an addition to their beauty, which they purchased with hourly inconvenience. For when this bone was in its place, as our seamen termed it, their spritsail yard was rigged across, it completely stopped up both nostrils, so that they spoke in the nose in a manner one should think scarcely intelligible. Besides these extraordinary bones, they had necklaces made of shells, neatly enough cut and strung together, bracelets also, if one may call by that name, 4 or 5 rings of small cord wore round the upper part of the arm, also a belt or string tied round the waist, about as thick as worsted wool, which last was frequently made of either human hair or that of the beast called by them kangaroo. Besides these, they paint themselves with the colours of red and white. The red they commonly lay on in broad patches on their shoulders or breasts, the white in stripes, some of which were narrow and confined to small parts of their body. Others were broad and carried with some degree of taste across their bodies, round their arms, legs, etc. They also lay it on in circles round their eyes, and in patches in different parts of their faces. The red they used seemed to be red ochre, but what the white was we could not find out. It was heavy and close-grained, almost as white lead, and had a saponaceous feel. Possibly it might be a kind of steatites. We lamented not being able to procure a bit to examine. These people seemed to have no idea of traffic, nor could we teach them. Indeed, it seemed that we had no one thing on which they set a value equal to induce them to part with the smallest trifle, except one fish which weighed about 1/2 pound, that they brought as a kind of token of peace. No one in the ship, I believe, procured from them the smallest article. They readily received the things we gave them, but never would understand our signs when asked for returns. This, however, must not be forgot, that whatever opportunities they had, they never once attempted to take anything in a clandestine manner. Whatever they wanted, they openly asked for, and in almost all cases bore the refusal, if they met with one, with much indifference. Except turtles. Dirty as these people are, they seem to be entirely free from lice, a circumstance rarely observed among the most cleanly Indians, and which here is the more remarkable, as their hair was generally matted and filthy enough. In all of them, indeed, it was very thin, and seemed as if seldom disturbed with the combing, even of their fingers, much less to have any oil or grease put into it. Nor did the custom of oiling their bodies, so common among most uncivilized nations, seem to have the least footing here. On their bodies we observed very few marks of cutaneous disorders, as scurfs, scars of sores, etc. Their spare thin bodies indicated temperance in eating, the consequence either of necessity or inclination, equally productive of health, particularly in this respect. On the fleshy parts of their arms and thighs, and some of their sides, were large scars and regular lines, which by their breadth and the convexity with which they held, showed plainly that they had been made by cuts of some blunt instrument, a shell perhaps, or the edge of a broken stone. These, as far as we could understand by the signs they made use of, were the marks of their lamentations for the deceased, in honour of whose memory, or to show the excess of their grief, they had in this manner wept for in blood. For food they seemed to depend very much, though not entirely, upon the sea. Fish of all kinds, turtle, and even crabs they strike with their lances very dexterously. These are generally bearded with broad beards, and their points smeared over with a kind of hard resin, which makes them pierce a hard body far easier than they would do without it. In the southernmost parts these fish spears had 4 prongs, and besides the resin were pointed with a sharp bone of a fish. To the northward again their spears had only 1 point, yet both, I believe, struck fish with equal dexterity. For the northern ones I can witness, who several times saw them through a glass, throw their spear from 10 to 20 yards, and generally succeed. To the southward again, the plenty of fish bones we saw near their fires proved them to be no indifferent artists. For striking of turtle, they use a peg of wood well bearded, and about 1 foot long. This fastens into a socket of a staff of light wood, as thick as a man's wrist, and 8 or 9 feet long, besides which they are tied together by a loose line of 3 or 4 fathoms in length. The use of this must undoubtedly be that when the turtle is struck, the staff flies off from the peg, and serves for a float to show them where the turtle is, as well as assists to tire him till they can with their canoes overtake and haul him in. That they throw this dart with great force we had occasion to observe while we lay in Endeavour's river, where a turtle which we killed had one of them entirely buried in its body, just across its breast. It seemed to have entered at the soft place where the forelimbs work, but not the least outward mark of the wound remained. Besides these things, we saw near their fireplaces plentiful remains of lobsters, shellfish of all kinds, and to the southward the skins of those sea animals which from their property of spouting out water when touched are commonly called sea squirts. These last, howsoever disgustful they may seem to an European palate, we found to contain under a coat as tough as leather a substance like the guts of a shellfish in taste, though not equal to an oyster, yet by no means to be despised by a man who is hungry. Of land animals they probably eat every kind that they can kill, which probably does not amount to any large number, every species here being shy and cautious to a high degree. The only vegetables we saw them use were yams of 2 sorts, the one long and like a finger, the other round and covered with stringy roots. Both sorts very small but sweet. They were so scarce where we were that we never could find the plants that produced them, though we often saw the places where they had been dug up by the Indians very newly. It is very probable that the dry season, which was at its height when we were there, had destroyed the leaves of the plants, so that we had no guides, while the Indians, knowing well the stalks, might find them easily. Whether they knew or ever made use of cocoas I cannot tell, The immense sharpness of every part of this vegetable, before it is dressed, makes it probable that any people who have not learned the uses of it from others may remain forever ignorant of them. Near their fires were great abundance of the shells of a kind of fruit resembling a pineapple very much in appearance, though in taste disagreeable enough. It is common to all the East Indies, and called by the Dutch there pin-apple bomen, pandanus, as also those of the fruit of a low palm, called by the Dutch moeskriga de calipus, Cycas circinalis, which they certainly eat, though they are not so unwholesome that some of our people, who, though forewarned, depending upon their example, eat one or two of, were violently affected by them both upwards and downwards. And our hogs, whose constitutions we thought might be as strong as those of the Indians, literally died after having eat them. It is probable, however, that these people have some method of preparing them, by which their poisonous quality is destroyed, as the inhabitants of the East Indian Islands are said to do by boiling them and steeping them 24 hours in water, then drying them and using them to thicken broth, from whence it should seem that the poisonous quality lays entirely in the juices, as it does in the roots of the manioca or cassava of the West Indies, and that when thoroughly cleared of them the pulp remaining may be a wholesome and nutritious food. Their victuals they generally dress by broiling or toasting them upon the coals. So we judged by the remains we saw. They knew, however, the method of baking or stewing with hot stones, and sometimes practised it, as we now and then saw the pits and burned stones, which had been made use of for that purpose. We observed that some, though but few, held constantly in their mouths the leaves of an herb, which they chewed as a European does tobacco or an East Indian betel. What sort of plant it was we had not an opportunity of learning, as we never saw anything but the chaws, which they took from their mouths to show us. It might be of the betel kind, and so far as we could judge from the fragments, was so. But whatever it was used without any addition, and seemed to have no kind of effect upon either their teeth or lips of those who used it. End of section 44. End of part 2 of some account of that part of New Holland called New South Wales.